leaders decide on a series of one-day strikes, but there'll be more talks with the employers first. After Monday's murder of a girl student in Leeds, a new message from a man who says he's the Ripper. The two sisters jailed for manslaughter of their father are refused bail but given leave to appeal. More government help for the unemployed, the cost £250 million. And how they brought the good news from Dallas to London, the revelation of JR's attacker. But first tonight, reports are still coming in of a huge hotel fire in the United States. At least 40 people are reported to have died and some 300 hurt in a massive blaze at the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. It was the city's largest hotel, built only 7 years ago. Helicopters have been used to rescue people from the hotel. We've just received this report from Martin Bell.
Fire broke out at 7:30 in the morning in the casino area of the hotel, the biggest in Las Vegas. Eyewitnesses said the front of the building was ablaze within 5 minutes, and dense smoke filled the 2,300-room tower inside, making it difficult for many of the guests to use the stairwells, which were designed as fire escapes. Helicopters from Nellis Air Force Base nearby joined in the rescue efforts being made by construction workers as well as by firemen. The fire engine's extension ladders couldn't reach higher than the 9th floor, and some of the survivors did, however, come down by ladder. But most of them were trapped on the upper floors. Some were suffocated by the smoke, and at least one died after he had tried to jump to safety. It was the helicopters that did much of the rescue work, as guests fled to the tower roof. Some tried to escape by knotting hotel sheets and towels together. At least 60 were taken to hospital. The luckier guests were the ones on the lower floors who were able to walk out more or less unscathed.
It was terrible. We went down about 5 floors. There was no light. It was absolutely hell. But then after that, it was nothing to it.
Most people you saw, were they reacting calmly to it?
Yes, I'd say I never saw anybody panic at all.
The toll has been rising throughout the day, and at latest reports, more bodies were being retrieved. There was criticism from survivors of the fire of the hotel staff, who, according to some guests, were nowhere to be seen. But volunteers from outside, the firemen, the helicopter crews, and the construction workers prevented still more lives from being lost. Rescue work is still continuing. This is Martin Bell in Washington.
Britain's firemen have today moved another step closer to strike action over their pay claim. But they want one more last-chance meeting with their employers to see if they'll change their minds. As expected, delegates from the country's 62 fire brigades overwhelmingly backed their union executive's decision yesterday to call a series of one-day national strikes. But they want to establish finally whether the employers are prepared to honour the agreement made after the last strike 2 years ago, which would give the men an 18.8% increase. Most have been offered only 6% so far. The delegates took just 90 minutes to decide their position when they met in Blackpool, from where Martin Adeney reports.
There was little doubt in anybody's mind as firemen assembled at the conference that the vote would be for industrial action. The executive resolution envisaged a series of sudden national strikes, for which notice would be given only for the first one, and that would probably be within a fortnight, although the executive foresee that there would be talks before then. An emergency edition of the union's newspaper, The Firefighter, spelt out the cause of the dispute. The agreement the union allege has been broken.
Firemen are not happy at all. This conference weren't happy at all. But one has to realise that that last strike that you're talking about produced an agreement that meant we never had to arrive at this position again. That agreement's been torn up. That leaves firemen with no option at all but to take industrial action in support of their position that was agreed by both governments.
Now, the employers appear possibly to be moving away from the 6% and might offer you more than 6%, though still short of the 18.8. What's your reaction? What's the conference's reaction to that?
The conference were absolutely clear in their minds that we're not talking about interim pieces, interim payments. What we're talking about is an agreement. And as far as they were concerned, it's the agreement that we're to settle for.
Well, it's certain that there will be a further meeting on this dispute next week, probably on Thursday. And with the employers in considerable disarray, there'll be a lot of urgent discussions between them and possibly with the government before that happens. But if the talks do break down, then the first of the one-day strikes is likely to follow fairly quickly the following week. It's clear that the firemen's tactic is to try and tie up as much equipment and make things as difficult as possible for local authorities by having these series of one-day strikes. It means they think that they'll have to keep Green Goddesses on permanent standby, and that'll be expensive, costing perhaps £1 million a day, compared with the 20 million which the firemen reckon it would cost to settle their claim.
Martin Aidney. The Chief Fire Officers Association said today its members will arrange fire cover to the best of their ability, but they do so in an atmosphere of sympathy for the firemen. The officers felt the men's pay agreement had been handled deplorably, creating an unnecessary situation. Detectives looking for the murderer of Miss Jacqueline Hill, said to be the 13th victim of the Yorkshire Ripper, are tonight studying a new tape-recorded message. It's from a man who said he carried out the killings, and he said he'd kill again next week. Following developments, Jeremy Thompson.
The call to the Mirror's Manchester office was made from a coin box. A man with a northeast accent told the operator, "It's Jack the Ripper. I'm going to strike again in Leeds next week, on the 28th. Snatches of the call were recorded, and today the tape was rushed to the Ripper headquarters in Leeds to be analysed and compared with a previous recording sent to the police by a man thought to be the murderer. The squad was also investigating the mystery of Jacqueline Hill's blood-stained handbag, which was given to police the night before her body was discovered. They were called in after a fellow student spotted the bag on the pavement very near to where Jacqueline had been attacked only minutes before. Two officers carried out a brief but fruitless search of the area right here where the handbag was found. Yet it wasn't until Tuesday morning that Jacqueline's body was found by a passerby. And that leaves a possibly crucial 10-hour gap before the latest hunt for the Ripper could begin.
I'm not making excuses for the officers. If the officers were negligent, then of course we shall find out. That is being inquired into. It's easy to say with hindsight that they should have found the body. Maybe they should. It was no more than 60 or 70 yards away.
At the same news conference, police issued descriptions of 3 men seen near the murder site who they urgently want to interview. One, they say, bears a strong resemblance to an earlier description of the Ripper.
3 soldiers serving with the Green Jackets have been charged with conspiring to murder the man, now in police custody, accused of murdering the Essex schoolboy Stephen Edmonston, who was found dead last month near Harlow. One of the soldiers, Private Neville George Edmonston, who's 19, is related to Stephen's family. The other 2 are Corporal Ivor Hurst, aged 25, and Private Gary Rosier, 21. The 3 are also charged with possessing prohibited weapons, among them 2 Sterling submachine guns, live ammunition and canisters of CS gas. They'll appear in court at Waltham Forest tomorrow. The 2 sisters, Annette and Charlene Moore, who were sent to prison for 3 years for the manslaughter of their brutal father, were refused bail by a judge in the High Court today. But he's allowed them to appeal against sentence, and it'll be heard very soon, within the next 10 days. Brian Hanrahan was in court.
Since sentence was passed last Monday, there's been a considerable groundswell of opinion that 3 years in jail is unnecessarily harsh. That sentiment has made itself noticed in the appeal court, both in the speed with which today's hearing was arranged and in the agreement to hear the full appeal within 10 days. Not willing to anticipate the outcome of that, Lord Justice Ackner declined to grant bail, but he did make comment on the very considerable publicity with which the case was surrounded. He described the original trial judge, Mr. Justice Smith, as very experienced, and said it was apparent that he'd viewed the offences in a significantly different light to that portrayed by the media. The younger sister, Charlene, had made an uncontested statement that there'd been talk between the sisters and their mother about finishing the father off with a knife. Lord Justice Ackner continued, a mirror had been smashed over his head and he'd been left upstairs, lying on the bed, bleeding from his head. Later, first a small knife had been used unsuccessfully, and then, successfully, a carving knife. Afterwards, the girl's solicitor explained the grounds on which they would appeal.
Well, I think basically the grounds that we've pursued before, the fact of the terrible background that the girls suffered, the traumatic events of the night in question, the fact that the girls, basically nice, decent girls, intelligent girls, and in fact girls that have never been in really any sort of difficulty with the courts before at all.
Do you think the media have reported it accurately so far?
I think that the media have been tremendously helpful and sympathetic to the girls.
But not necessarily totally accurate.
I don't make any criticism whatsoever of the media, because I think also the media have reported the fact that these sort of things, these remarks have been made by the judge. These sort of questions have been put to me by the media about certain elements of the evidence. I don't think that the media has attempted to shine one side of it or not. The fact that the media has obvious sympathy that reflects the public attitude to the girls is a different factor completely.
The sisters are being held in Ascombe Grange Open Prison near York. Mr. Couch was visiting them this evening to explain the outcome. He thought the judge might have been unwilling to grant bail in case the appeal failed, and then it would seem cruel for them to have to return after only a few days of freedom.
Mr. Nicholas Reed, the General Secretary of Exit, the voluntary euthanasia organisation, has been charged on 2 counts of aiding and abetting suicide, contrary to the Suicide Act of 1961. He'll appear in court on Monday. Mr. Reed, who's 33 and from London, was also charged at West Hendon Police Station with 4 counts of conspiracy to aid and abet suicide. The charges follow an investigation by Scotland Yard into 12 suicides or attempted suicides in London, Chelmsford and Glasgow. The former Labour Foreign Secretary, Dr. David Owen, has announced that he won't stand for re-election to the Shadow Cabinet, as he feels he can best contribute to resolving policy divisions within the party from the freedom of the backbenchers. In a letter to constituents, Dr. Owen said he regarded the Conservative government as extremist, but Labour would not oust Mrs. Thatcher if they swung to the other extreme. He said he supported the decision by Mr. William Rogers, a fellow member of the so-called Gang of Three, to stand for the Shadow Cabinet. They agreed on the issues facing the party and would continue to campaign together. A new deal for the young unemployed. That's how Mr. James Pryor, Employment Secretary, described the government's £250 million jobs package, announced yesterday by the Prime Minister. Its aim that every 16 and 17-year-old without a job should be assured of training. Mr. Pryor confirmed there'd be an extra 180,000 places next year in the Youth Opportunities Programme. Other measures for adults include an extension of the scheme for temporary short-time working compensation and 25,000 places in a new community enterprise.
What I'm hoping to do is to use this really very serious problem of unemployment amongst young people, try and use it to our advantage so that at least we're getting some really positive element of training and all that goes with training for young people, which otherwise they would not get, so that we, if you like, upgrade the whole calibre of our workforce, which will be of an enormous benefit over the years, whereas if they do nothing at the moment and they're left on the streets, we shall have a toll of bitterness in future. So we want to turn this to a dreadful position to our advantage.
Mr. Pryor's new measures underline the importance of the Youth Opportunities Programme in the fight against unemployment. Already the programme runs more than 200 training workshops throughout the country, and Ian Ross visited one of them, sponsored by Marconi in Fife, an area of high unemployment.
A basic course in electronic assembly techniques is the way this workshop provides a working start for 16-year-olds who've no real educational qualifications and who've been out of work for 6 weeks or more. During their time here, 14 weeks on average, but they can stay longer, they're paid £23.50 a week. There's no guarantee of a job afterwards. The main purpose is to make them better equipped to find permanent employment. But of the 77 who've been through this workshop since it started, 55 have got jobs, 44 in electronics, and 33 of them with Marconi. Only 1 in 10 doesn't stay the course or is asked to leave. This workshop at Hill End and Fife is sponsored by Marconi, which is part of GEC, and is one of the biggest employers in the area. The supervisors and the workshop manager are all seconded from Marconi. And after basic training, they get the youngsters working on products for which there is a market.
The visual doorbell was designed by the Royal National Institute for the Deaf in Glasgow, and this has been very successful. We've sold the first 170 units, both north and south of the border. We set our first year's budget for £12,000 of sales, without really much idea of what we were going to sell at that time, of course, and we achieved a little over £20,000. So this year we've set 25,000 as our target, and we're about 10% ahead of target as at the end of October.
And that must make Hill End Workshop perhaps the most economical workshop in the country.
A dispute has halted production of the mini metro at BL's Longbridge Works in Birmingham. Windows in an office block were broken during a demonstration. The trouble began when car seats supplied by an outside contractor were blacked. 500 Longbridge men were laid off and others walked out, and they're refusing to go back until everyone's reinstated. The police were called, but there were no arrests. Lincolnshire County Council has become the first local authority to abolish school meals in a final effort to reduce the deficit in its education budget. The service is expected to make a loss of £4 million by the end of next year, and from now on the county will only supply meals for needy children. Stricter rules on cigarette advertising have been agreed between the government and the tobacco companies. This voluntary agreement, which will last until the middle of 1982, includes a ban on advertising higher tar cigarettes, reducing the average tar content, and an X certificate for cigarette advertisements in the cinema. There'll be new and bigger health warning slogans, and spending on poster advertising will be reduced by £6 million. The Social Services Secretary, Mr. Patrick Jenkin, described the agreement as a modest advance towards cutting the toll of disease and death from smoking. Frances Coverdale reports.
The cigarette manufacturers spend nearly £20 million a year on poster campaigns. Now they've agreed to cut back by 30% and to ban such posters near schools or playgrounds. The government health warnings will be more prominent. They'll carry the word danger, and the message will be varied to make more impact. New messages will be, think first, most doctors don't smoke, and think about the health risks before smoking. There's been a growing campaign for legislation on cigarette advertising, and this may come when the agreement runs out. But why not legislate now?
If we had said to the tobacco industry, we are not interested in a voluntary agreement, we are going to legislate, we would have been exposed for perhaps a year. Legislation takes time, it's controversial, it's got to be fitted into the timetable. So what we've decided to do is to get what improvements we could on the present voluntary agreement, but have a very short one. It's only going to run for 20 months, whereas the industry wanted 4 years. At the end of 20 months, we have made it quite clear that legislation is an option. The Secretary of State said in the House of Commons today that there could be a free vote on legislation of advertising cigarettes. So we have retained the freedom of manoeuvre to respond to parliamentary opinion and public opinion. And legislation, when the 20-month agreement runs out, is a real option.
Mr. Stan Orme, the Shadow Health Minister, said the agreement fell far short of the proposals put forward by Labour. And the strongest criticism came from the anti-smoking campaign ASH, whose director said it was like the Home Guard trying to fight off a nuclear attack. He called for legislation to end all promotion of cigarettes.
The Royal Navy has got its wings back. Ever since the Ark Royal was scrapped, the Navy's been without fighter cover of its own. But today the new aircraft carrier HMS Invincible took on board her first squadron of Fleet Air-Armed jump jets. Our defence correspondent Christopher Wayne saw them arrive.
The arrival of HMS Invincible's Sea Harriers ended a 2-year gap in Fleet Air-Armed carrier operations. Since 1978, warships have been without any naval air cover. Sea Harriers are slower than the old Phantoms, but much more versatile. Invincible doesn't have to turn into wind to launch and recover aircraft, and there's no need for catapults, arrestor wires and complicated landing aids. In wartime, the Sea Harrier's job would be to shoot down aircraft attacking convoys. To improve performance, Invincible's been fitted with a ski jump ramp, enabling the jump jets to carry heavier loads of fuel or bombs and missiles. The Sea Harrier Squadron will be taking part in trials before Invincible's commissioning next July. 2 more carriers, Illustrious and a new Ark Royal, are now being built. All 3 will be operational by the mid-1980s.
Cricket now, and NCC has taken what it calls appropriate disciplinary action against certain unnamed members following the scenes at Lord's during the centenary test against Australia in August. Then angry spectators jostled and abused the umpires who, after 5 pitch inspections, had said the outfield was too damp for play, despite that day's fine weather. MCC's punishment wasn't specified, but it's thought some members have been asked to resign. A story that's entirely fictional has been making news again, the shooting of J.R., the villain of the American TV soap opera Dallas. The secret of whodunit is contained in videotape brought into Heathrow Airport by an American security guard. It'll be kept at a secret location overnight and won't be given to the BBC until tomorrow morning, when American viewers will already have seen it. But with tension mounting, our correspondent Martin Bell has been to Texas to look at some of the reality behind the fantasy.
This is a story of Dallas and dollars, of intrigues and ambitions and lawsuits. It is also the story of the real Ewing Oil Company, which isn't to be found in any of the city's fancier skyscrapers, but has offices in a block of flats in a rather less fashionable neighborhood out by the old airport. And there, behind an improvised sign, Mr. Bobby Ewing does business. If the fictional Mr. Ewing is big oil, the real Mr. Ewing is small oil. He's been in business for 6 years, producing a bit in West Texas, prospecting a bit in Montana, and this past year making a bit on the side with his very own Ewing Oil T-shirt. He was about to market some other little items like the Ewing Oil paperweight when the TV company's lawyers jumped all over him. The makers of Dallas sued for $1.5 million for breach of copyright. He was insulted. No one takes a Texas oil man for only $1.5 million. That, he says, is for taxi drivers. So he counterclaimed for $4 million, and he hired the sharpest of Houston lawyers, Mr. Richard Racehorse Haynes, to argue his case. Compared to this, who shot J.R. is kid stuff.
Well, I was born with the name of Bobby Gene Ewing. My name is not Robert, and it's kind of like Mr. Racehorse Haynes said. Why didn't they sue my mother and daddy for giving me my name?
Mr. Haynes is your lawyer, right?
Yes, that's correct. I think I've got a right to use my name, and I'll put it this way. If it ends up that I'm living in a country where I can't use my own name, I better go find me somewhere else.
So if it comes down to a case of will the real Bobby Ewing stand up, you have no doubt who the real Bobby Ewing is.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm an ex-Marine, and they always taught me you don't never start a fight. And if you can withdraw from the fight, you withdraw. Or let's put it this way. I've always lived by this philosophy. I'm the biggest coward in the world, and I'm going to run, but don't catch me. And they've caught me, and if they want to fight, I'll show them what fight means.
Dallas is soap opera repeating itself as real life of a sort. And there's money to be made from it, not probably by the real Bobby Ewing, who's $30,000 the poorer in legal costs already, but by others cutting deals and seizing chances in the best J.R. tradition. The South Fork Ranch in Plano, just north of Dallas, is a little gold mine. It's a place of pilgrimage for addicts of the TV series, who can now do more than just be photographed outside the gate. They can buy a piece of the land itself, being sold off now in square-foot lots at $25 a piece, an investment, according to the prospectus, as American as grits and gravy, and soon to be open to British buyers as well. The owner of South Fork, Joe Duncan, J.R. Duncan, of course, is making the offer, and together with your square foot of the ranch, this one is Larry Hagman's own, suitably fertilized, he'll give you a deed certificate with oil and gas rights, and a $100 bill in Hagman money for lighting your cigar with. I have to ask you, sir, do you know who shot J.R.?
I wish I did. I'd go to the nearest bookie.
Do you care who shot J.R.?
No.
As for those who buy their square foot of the property, they should be warned that it's only a speculative investment. No oil or gas is known to exist anywhere near the South Fork Ranch, and the Ewing Oil Company, I mean the real Ewing Oil Company, is exploring somewhere else. This is Martin Bell in Plano, Texas.
And now the main story tonight. Reports of the death toll in the Las Vegas hotel fire are still coming in. It now stands at more than 75, and fire chiefs say it could reach 100. Over 300 others were injured. It was the worst fire in the city's history. That's the news tonight. Good night.
Good evening. Well, quite a windy night, as you can see from the chart, but a fairly mild night, these mild southwesterly winds. These fronts are going to come across eastwards, bringing rain across much of England and Wales tonight. But up in the far north, the weather's a